Pacers keep it rolling. They beat the Warriors at home. That's 5 in a row for the Indiana Pacers. Not a great night, but Thomas Bryant with some huge plays. Bennedict Mathurin was great. The Warriors had no answer for Siakam, and we'll talk about it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Saturday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today I am in Goshen, New York with my travel setup, so apologies for any sound issues here for a wedding, hence the voice not being at 100%, but we're pushing through just like the Pacers did against the Golden State Warriors Friday night, or whatever version of the Warriors that was. Hate that for the fans who went to see Steph. I get why the Warriors do it. NBA's made this a reality that they have to deal with, and I hate that the league does this. But Pacers took advantage. They didn't play very well, and they still beat Golden State. Much to discuss. I thought Bennedict Mathurin was special. Thomas Bryant was awesome in the fourth quarter. Pacers had some fun style stuff going on, and at the end, next two games are against the Cavs. Danny Cunningham and I of Locked On Cavs talked for about 10 minutes earlier this week. Just going to run that whole interview for the second segment today because I have less time than normal because I'm here for a wedding. So we start with Pacers Warriors, a fun one, and to me, this game was fascinating. First of all, bummed I missed Red Panda. Congrats to those who went, but it felt like a blend of the Pacers' two most recent games, the Nets game and the Bulls game. And what I mean by that is, in the Nets game, the parallel I felt was the Pacers just had too much talent to lose. And the reason that is reality now is because their defense is better, right? Earlier in the season, when they were blowing these exact kind of games against these bad or teams that they were clearly better than for whatever reason, a big factor in that to me was they couldn't stop them enough to make it matter, right? That's how they lost to Brooklyn, even though they could have won that game. They only scored 90 points. And Toronto smoked them because they couldn't stop Toronto. And Orlando had some games like that where the Pacers probably did enough but still lost. You know, those games were bad offensive games too. Now that their defense is better, it's not awesome, but better, especially with that starting five, they give themselves so much wiggle room. And so even in the stretches of this game where I felt like the Pacers weren't playing very well, they could just get in the open floor whenever they wanted, right? Because the Warriors did not have any talent that could actually create good shots. Poor Dennis Schroeder, he was handling, he was trying his best to get into the paint and penetrate, but he couldn't get it going. He played last night, or the night before in Detroit, and he was begging for screens all night. You could see it. He'd be pointing at Trace Jackson Davis. He'd be pointing at Quentin Post. He was begging for someone to come set a good screen for him so he could flow into some action, but he's not used to having that kind of ball dominance with the Warriors. He's not used to these screeners. He's been there for less than a month and hasn't played in that role at all, and the Warriors just never hummed when they were trying to play that way, and they couldn't create good shots. Most of their good shots were not created that way. Schroeder was -10. He was 5 for 13 with 12 points, 4 assists, 3 turnovers. And he was their best creator on the floor. As soon as he couldn't get going, it was over. There was nothing that Golden State could do to generate good shots. And so the Pacers didn't really play that well, I thought. This is my parallel to the Nets game. They shot it okay from the field, 52%, but missed some threes, 15 turnovers, lost the offensive rebound fight. That's what happened in Brooklyn. But they had enough to win because they were just better. And their defense actually gives them a better floor than it did early in the season. Now, this felt like the Bulls game to me because the Pacers' offensive focus was very obvious. Get to the dang rim. Again, this is their second game in a row doing this. Their points in the paint number doesn't quite show it as much as it did against Chicago. But 54 was that number for the Pacers, so exactly half of their point total in this game. But you could see how it opened up their whole offense, right? Mathurin was doing well in the paint, 10 shots on twos for him, 12 two-point attempts for Siakam. Those two guys in particular were obvious about it to me. Every shot Andrew Nembhard took was a 2. Like, the Pacers clearly wanted to get back to that rim pressure and play from there, and some of that came from the fact that they were in transition a lot because they were forcing misses, and the Warriors had 13 turnovers, but some of that was just clearly an offensive focus, get into the paint, attack these mismatches, and the difference between this and the Chicago game in terms of the shots they got were how they got them. For example, against Chicago, it was a lot more drives. In this game, Pacers 49 drives, barely below their season average, but a lot of this game and a lot of the story of this game to me, Pacers winning this, was Siakam-based. He had 25 points on 16 shots and 9 boards. And it became very obvious to me extremely early in this game that, and they've had a couple games like this of late, I feel like the Pacers have, that the Warriors had no answer for Pascal Siakam. None. Kyle Anderson started the game on him. That was the right guy for Masai's perspective. Lindy Waters, probably a little too thin and tiny. Trace Jackson-Davis, too slow. Buddy Hield and Dennis Schroeder, certainly too small. Okay, Kyle Anderson, that works. Way too slow. Minus 23 was Kyle Anderson. And he actually looked like he played okay if you watched him. He just did not help the Warriors at all on the defensive end. So Siakam would get it and spin right past him or just get somewhere in the lane. Okay, well, let's see what the Warriors' adjustment is. Guy Santos? They had nothing. They had nothing to put on Siakam. Guy Santos was too small. Siakam just turned and shot over that. So he took a lot of twos, but they were more, the turn around and shoot over somebody. He had a nasty long two late in the shot clock over Dennis Schroeder at one point, and those were awesome. So he was terrific, gave them a great baseline. He was out there, plus 21 was Pascal Siakam, and when he's unguardable, the Pacers can really kind of use him as a fulcrum. Not that they're playing through him or he's not facilitating. He didn't have a single assist. They can just use his threat, the presence of hey, that tall guy can score at any time, to really get their offense going in other ways, whether that's paint pressure elsewhere because guys are unwilling to help off of him or running an action on his side of the floor. All that stuff really panned out for the Pacers in a meaningful way this game. Siakam was awesome. Ben Mather was my favorite player to watch in this game. The second quarter, when he came in particular, I felt like was the most fun version of Ben Mathurin. He had so much zip and pop and pow in his game. He was flying around the perimeter, the fastest I've seen him move like that. Not all season, maybe I've seen it in his career, but recently, and he's been so good at so many other things recently, ball movement, defense, etc., that you forget that when he does that, he just looks so unguardable, right? He was getting into the gaps. That was very noteworthy to me. If he had space in front of him, with or without the ball, he would take it and force the Warriors to react. And it was quick decisions, right? He kept the ball moving in the second quarter on some nice passes. He defended pretty well. I thought he was great in that stretch, decisive, fast, taking that space, like I said. And then the fourth quarter, he put it away. Him and Haliburton had some good connections on some threes. Mathurin had a huge rebound, put back. That's how they put away the Suns with that Siakam play. This time it was Mathurin. That was a huge sequence. And he and Haliburton were really part of that dagger sequence, right? Haliburton to Mathurin for the dagger after a Pat Spencer foul bait turnover. What? That really happened. And then the very next possession was the exact same thing. Haliburton to Mathurin again. Really great Ben Mathurin game on the offensive end, right? We've talked a lot about his defense being good recently, but I thought the way he played on offense really made everything work for the Pacers. They kept him in there for much longer than almost anybody else. Him and Haliburton, the only guys over 30 minutes in this game because the bench guards weren't really cutting it this game. Jarris Walker did not play very well, so they didn't even turn to him in the second half. Instead, they go with Mathurin more often. He was very good, and I thought his ability to take that space and make those quick decisions was what made that all possible. If I'm going to really give someone the X factor for this game, I have to give it to Thomas Bryant. I mean, he was just awesome in the fourth quarter. And a key time, too, which shouldn't really be the case. The Pacers should have put this game away several times. They would go up 12, and then it would trickle back to 5. And then they'd go up 14, and it would trickle back down. They had so many chances where it was like, okay, just 6 points right here and this game's over. They couldn't do it. Fourth quarter, the opposite happens. The Warriors are the team surging. It's 80-76. Clearly, you could feel it through the broadcast. Some nerves in the arena from the fans. Then it was Thomas Bryant time. Steph's going nuts on the bench. Quentin Post just hit a 3, the 52nd pick in the draft. It's a 4-point game. Insert Thomas Bryant heroism. He switched on to Dennis Schroeder. Got a stop. He hit a 3. Guess what? He got switched on to Schroeder again. Got another stop. And then not long after, gets a steal. Throw-ahead pass for the assist. Pacers are up 7. Siakam hits a 3 right after. And they rolled away. I mean, that stretch was huge. When the game got, I can't believe this game got that dicey, but it did. And they couldn't have done it without Thomas Bryant on both ends. His defense and offense were huge in that stretch. Maybe his best, straight-up defensive stretch for the Pacers at all, not counting his rebounding. His rebounding has always been very good for this team, or at least very powerful. But that stretch was legitimately good, what you'd consider traditionally defense, staying in front of somebody or getting a steal. It was really impressive. 4 stocks for Thomas Bryant in this game, 4 rebounds, 5 points on 2 for 3 shooting. Very good game on that end of the floor for him. The only other takeaway I really had from this game, because the Pacers just didn't play very well and beat a team they were better than. Besides the players I've already talked about, Haliburton was pretty good, by the way. I did laugh at one more note to get to since I mentioned Pat Spencer and the foul bait. I got a kick out of the broadcast saying, and that's a career high for Pat Spencer in the second quarter. That's how goofy this game was with who was available and what you were actually seeing on the basketball product. My last takeaway from this is kind of bench related. So in the first half, Carlisle went to a full bench group. So McConnell, Shepard, Walker, Toppin, Bryant. And I just for a team that's so good with these 2 point guard groups or having one of their 2 stars on the floor, I just don't really get it with that group. It's been fine, I guess, numerically. It's only played in 2 games the whole season. The Nets game that just happened in this game. And it's like, it doesn't really make sense to me. It doesn't go that well. And the Pacers with, 3 bench guys on the floor and no stars this season have been kind of clunky. Like they were -5 with Nembhard plus the bench guys this year. It's kind of worked at times, I guess, with Mathurin out there with that group, but it's just really goofy that the way they have to juggle that. And you see all season that's why they sub the way they do, with getting Pascal out early so he can be back in with that group, and Haliburton carries down the stretch of the first and third quarter with that group. But going full 5 bench didn't work, and they didn't turn back to Jarris in the second half. I thought that was a factor in that decision as well. Was Walker not playing particularly well with that group? So I don't think they'll go to that anymore unless they have to, and when Nesmith returns, they certainly won't. But the bench has not been very good for the Pacers of late. All right, McConnell got going a little bit. Like, he shot 50%. It didn't feel like it. If you watch the game, he still played fine. He had 6 assists and was a +5. Like, his energy and juice against zone is still very important. But, Shepard goes 2 for 6. Toppin goes 1 for 3. Walker goes 0 for 3. If it wasn't for Thomas Bryant, a really poor bench game, right? The starters were the reason the Pacers won this one. I don't know if there needs to be any rotational changes or anything like that. It's just I wouldn't go to that 5-man group as much. And if you're going to go 4 bench guys at once, that's fine. But one of them has to be either Andrew Nembhard, a second point guard, or a star player, and Haliburton or Siakam. Usually they've been good about that, turning away from it a little bit of late for reasons I'm not necessarily certain of. But I think they got away from it in the second half because there was a realization, this is not going to work. And it won't definitely work in the next 2 games. Pacers play the Cavs twice in a row, the best team in the NBA. They just beat Oklahoma City. Statement win, clear as day. Cavs are for real. They look great. It's going to be tough for the Pacers. Danny Cunningham hosts Locked On Cavs. He's new to that show this year. He's crushing it. We talked earlier this week for Locked On Cavs. He had some questions about the Pacers and then asked me about the Cavs. Perfect time to just throw this in. So this second segment here to close out this weekend show, it's just going to be me running that. So I guess I'll close out with some comments here. Thank you guys for listening to this. Sorry I can't do a little more, but again, I'm very busy this weekend with other things. I'll be back Monday talking Pacers-Cavs round 1, and I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East. But let's talk some Cavs with Danny Cunningham. Before we do that, though, need to talk to you guys about the great people over at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs, they're here, and they are better with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, on that first $5 bet. And the FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more right on the same page. You go visit the website. You can see everything you'd want to know, right? The spreads, your over-unders, all sorts of stuff's on the same page. You can track stats from the game, see live play-by-play, and so much more. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That is on FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making this your first listen today and every single day. Make your second listen Locked On Warriors. Hear what Charlie's got to say about this Skeleton Crew Warriors team losing this game. And now, let's talk some Cavs Pacers with Danny Cunningham.
And for the first time this season, the Indiana Pacers will be squaring off with the Cleveland Cavaliers. It is the final Central Division opponent for the Cavs to see. Bring in Tony East now to talk about them. And the Pacers, Tony, were a team that made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, lost to the Boston Celtics in 4 games, and have, I think it's fair to say, probably underachieved so far this season. What has gone wrong that's led to them being a team below 500 as we finally make our way into 2025?
Yeah, how is it possible that it's 2025 and there's no Pacers-Cavs yet? I mean, the Pacers have played everyone else in the Central Division twice. It's really strange how this has gone. Yeah, they're not happy to be 18-18, certainly, as of us talking. And their first, I'd say through the end of November, was really head-scratching in a lot of ways. In some ways, they could explain it away and understand it, which made it less painful than some of these other teams falling short of expectations this year. And that's because they were really hurt, and they still have been a little hurt. They were down 3 starters pretty quickly in the season. Aaron Nesmith was missing time. Andrew Nembhard was missing time. And then Isaiah Jackson tore his Achilles, and James Wiseman tore his Achilles within the first 6 games of the season. And that doesn't even account for other guys who have been in and out. Obi Toppin's missed some time. Myles Turner's missed. I don't need to go through the list of names, but that does add up very quickly. They were starting 2-way contract players for a couple weeks. It's just the reality they were in. But they still had Tyrese Haliburton and Pascal Siakam for every single game this season. And at some point, you shouldn't, be 10 and 15 when you have your 2-star players. And that's where the rest of their struggles really came into light. And that's that Haliburton wasn't very good in their first 15 games. He would admit it all the time. We'd ask him. He couldn't find the answers. He made 28% of his threes. In that stretch, he shot well under 40%. He's averaging 15 points a game. The passing was still kind of there, but the team's pace wasn't the same because of the guys that were in and out. Just everything was different than what made them who they were last year, which was a star point guard, a really strong identity, and a bunch of players that could support that identity. And then they had none of that to start this season. They've gotten way back to that. That was a really bad sentence. They've gotten back to that recently. Haliburton looks great again these last 20 or so games. He's back at about an all-star level. They're healthy again, minus Aaron Nesmith. Their pace is back. Their offense looks really good in the year 2025 so far, albeit in only 2 games. They're back to 500 because they've reestablished that stuff, but there's still this kind of underlying fear of is this so feeble? Could this all just go away because they started so poorly?
Right. What do you think has led to that turnaround? Because they got off to that slow start. They're 7-3 in their last 10. They are back up to 500, which I wasn't necessarily someone that was super high on the Pacers as repeating going back to the conference finals this year, but I didn't think that they would get off to the starter. I didn't think they'd be a bad team the way that they were for the first part of this season so far. But was there a moment or was there something that you look back at and say, okay, that's when this team kind of was able to flip the switch on and become something that resembled the Pacers team we thought we would see this year?
Yeah, 2 things stand out in that way. One is the actual opposite of what happened last season, the in-season tournament time off that they had, right? Last year going to the finals in Vegas this year, and the Cavs had this. Every team really had this, but that 4 or 5 day gap between the last game that was played before those NBA Cup games and the restart of the regular season. And every team can say the same thing. Yes, this is great. We get to practice, but the Pacers stunk to start the season, so it was uniquely helpful to them and their health situation. And after those practices, they've looked a lot better. They refocused on the possession battle. They're taking way more shots than their opponent in a lot of these games now. Their defense has been – the Pacers' defense has been better. Not good, but better. That's an important distinction with a team like them. And they're taking more threes. Not a ton more threes, but more threes than they were early in the season. Another thing that was a problem for them ever since they've lost Buddy Hield. They've struggled with that. But the real big turnaround point has been Andrew Nembhard coming back. And I know that no one thinks of him as a star because he's not a star, but he is an incredibly good player and a crazy key part of the Pacers' identity. He played the first 2 games he returned. He only was playing in the first half. Then he played a 3rd game in Chicago where he only played in the 3rd quarter. And they have won 8 of 11 since he's played all 4 quarters of games. And he just does everything they need from a player. He takes pressure off of Haliburton by being able to attack the paint. He's their best defensive player on the team. He can shoot. He is just really, really good. And 3-and-D players next to a star player are really valuable. So his return has been really understated, along with time to actually integrate him and a new backup center in Thomas Bryant. All of a sudden, they've been floating. They look great.
So one of the things fundamentally that looks different about this Pacers team from last year is the speed at which they play. It's not to say they're playing at a very slow pace, because they're not, but they're not playing at a breakneck pace that they were last year. Last season, they were number 2 in the NBA behind Washington in pace. This year, they're all the way down to number 7. I say all the way down as if that's some far drop, but it is a considerable difference in pace. Has that been something that's been done on purpose for Indiana, or has that just been the result of a few different things?
Result of a few different things. The rank part's really interesting, right? Because I don't think their actual raw pace numbers, it is lower than last year, but it's not so much lower. But they're in a mix of, teams 5 through 15 or something that are all pretty close to their number. And it's kind of this been league adjustment to a little more tempo after kind of what they did last year. Early in the season, I heard someone say, everyone's playing like us but us, for the Pacers. And I think that's kind of what this is that you're, this unique air quotes style isn't so unique, right? And so all of a sudden you don't look as fast. Teams are prepared for high-paced teams. Like the Kings 2 years ago went through the same thing, right? When they had their darling 3rd seed season, they had this awesome offense that was really fast and wow, look at De'Aaron Fox. And then the next year they fell back to earth a little bit offensively as the league kind of got to it. I think the Pacers were afraid a little bit that could happen, and they've bounced back offensively, obviously, recently, but certainly a tough thing for them to figure out is how do we get that juice and tempo back? I don't think it was intentional. I don't think they wanted to slow down. Haliburton's just brilliant in the open floor. They have a lot of great run to the corner shooter kind of guys, to use some coach speak. And
recently they get back to that a little bit where you'll see after made shots or after a player on the other team goes down or the ball goes flying in the crowd, they want to go get it quick. They want to get up the floor as fast as they can, just use the clock to their advantage, use, a team running back to their advantage. And they have been better, I think, in those ways recently. But I think a big part of their pace differences this year is, when their defense stinks or when, they're missing so many guys, it's hard to play that identity, right? It's not an easy style to play if you're not used to it, if you're not really connected as a team. And with all due respect to their two-way contract players or, some of their deep bench guys, like, you can't just come in and do it like right away. You have to be playing fairly consistently or at least, a couple times a week to be able to come in and connect to that kind of groove. So I think their injuries really hurt there. The other thing is they're seeing a ton of zone defense this year, most in the league from opponents, which makes sense. They don't have Buddy Hield anymore. They don't have Bruce Brown anymore. They don't have Doug McDermott anymore. They don't have Jalen Smith anymore. Those were good shooters as role players for their team. Bruce Brown, probably not a great shooter, but guys who could knock it down. They're getting zoned against a ton, especially their second units. And they have guys who can make threes. Like, no one is a terrible shooter on the Pacers except for maybe TJ McConnell. But that makes it really easy to zone up against them. And they've had a couple games this year where that just cooks them up so much that they get slow, they can't score. And there's some games where they do great against the zone. They just ripped up the Miami Heat zone. But because that's kind of been an inconsistent result, teams have been really willing to go to that. That slowed down their games a bunch more than they saw last season. And with Haliburton not just shooting right over the top of them like he did last season, it just hasn't felt the same in the way they've been able to break those zones down. I think that's really slowed their pace meaningfully. So there's some stuff that they'll probably feel like is tangible and fixable, but the season's almost halfway over and right. it looks like this. So I think they can get probably finished. I bet they do finish the season top 5 in pace, but the rest of the league has certainly caught up to the way they want to play, and it's made it a little harder for them to stand out as a high-paced team.
So I haven't studied the schedules of Detroit and Milwaukee and Chicago, but I would have to imagine that this is the final first matchup for any two teams in the Central Division. Like, I know the Cavs have played those other three teams, and I would imagine those other three teams have all played each other too, and the Pacers. But as an outsider, as somebody who has not yet seen the Cavs up close and in person, Tony, what has your impression been of the 30-4 as we record this? The Cavs played Charlotte Sunday night, but what has your impression of the Cavs' start to the season been?
You could have said 31-4. Would have been okay.
I don't want to put the cart before the horse there. Although
the Hornets are 2-0 against the Pacers this year, so maybe I am. Yeah, it's really fun to watch them. Like, I've made the joke a few times that every team that makes a coaching change for probably 10 to 15 years now is going to be like, the Cavs, we want that to happen to us because everything looks great. So here's a couple things that stand out to me. One is a guy that has the ball a lot's playing a lot better, and that helps your team, and that's Darius Garland, right, who I didn't realize like how much his jaw thing messed up his grip. I'm sure you've talked about this all the time.
Right, yeah.
I think that's really a really interesting thing to see how good, because he was so good when he was an all-star a few years ago, and it hadn't really felt the same sense because he's been in and out so much. Him being healthy and shooting really well again and consistent in an offense that suits him better has made them look amazing on the offensive end, obviously. I know a lot of people point to various improvements from different players, and I'll talk about Mobley in a second, but to me, that's been the biggest change from last year for the Cavs is when a guy that good has the ball all the time, you're going to be a better team. And Evan Mobley's passing is the coolest thing ever. I mean, it's people like, oh, his assist numbers aren't up that much, but it doesn't matter. Like he catches it at the elbow or at the free throw line or wherever, the slot, just whips it to someone else or puts it on like quick decisions, right? Like Spursy 0.5 second stuff that is really effective. He looks great. I've always been high on Mobley as well. So the two guys that I think people had the most questions about for their future of the Cavs or with the Cavs being way better as players and within that system has been really cool. And when you can do that and defend at the level they did a few years ago when they were at the top of the league, turns out that's a pretty good combination. So I've enjoyed watching them, even though I haven't gotten a chance to see them in person yet.
Well, you'll get a chance 2 times because the Cavs play the Pacers in each of the next 2 weeks. So, Tony, thanks so much for doing this. We will do this once again next week.
You got it.
There he is, Tony East. If you want to learn more about the Pacers before the first of 2 matchups the Cavs have with Indiana over the next couple of weeks, check out Locked On Pacers. Does a great job there.